Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Streetwise podcast. To be money wise, you need to be streetwise. And for today's podcast, we're going to be talking about not quitting too early, or basically expecting too much too soon. Now, success is a result. It is a result of the decisions, the choices, and the actions that you do on a regular basis and have done in the past. Now, we live in a world where gratification is basically expected now. People struggle to defer gratification. As a species, we human beings are pleasure seekers, and so we look for pleasure and we want to enjoy the here and now. We want to enjoy things now. We're impatient in many ways. And with the world going fast as it is, with sales letters, with copywriting, with social media, with TV, with all these things that are bombarding us daily, our perception of success and our expectation of success has changed a lot. People now expect to be successful fast. People want their rewards, they want their results, and they want their success fast. We've seen a few people who have been very successful quickly, and there could be an element of timing involved with that. But on the whole, success is something that very rarely comes fast. What we don't see is the amount of work that has been done over the years to get to that point. So, for example, we see film stars, we see TV stars, we see musicians. They suddenly appear, they're on the TV, they're on radio, they're on interviews, they're everywhere. Their music is in the charts, their films are in the cinemas, and it suddenly seems like they've appeared out of nowhere. You might see of a couple of lesser well-known films previously before that, a year or two before that. But generally, what people don't realise is that household names, which appear to be everywhere and have appeared to be everywhere for quite a while, had many years where they probably started off as sort of children, maybe pre-teens, and they were at classes where they were learning the acting or the musicians, the music. People were practicing the guitars in their bedrooms for hours on end in their garages. And they built up and they did gigs, they worked hard to a point where they hit the tipping edge. And then from then on, momentum took hold and success then came flooding their way. And then all of a sudden we see them everywhere. The success did not come within basically as soon as they picked up the microphone or the guitar. It took years to get to that point. And this is something which I think a lot of people have forgotten, and I think a lot of people sell themselves short, because if you expect your success too soon, then when it doesn't arrive, you are likely to give up too soon. There's a great image I often see on the internet. It's a picture of a guy who's with a pickaxe digging away a tunnel into the ground, and he's digging away and he's got so far into the rock, and then he decides to stop when he's about several inches away from a large chunk of gold. And so the moral of the image is that people keep chipping away, and then they give up just at that moment when it could be just slightly too soon. People carry on. If they carried on and chipped away a bit further, a bit more, they would have found that large lump of gold, which would have changed their life entirely, changed their circumstances. Now, that isn't to say that you should carry on flogging a dead horse. There are times when you will realise that it isn't going anywhere and that you need to change your plans or go for something completely different. That is understandable. And you will understand, you'll find out when it is a dead horse. There is some people who will keep flogging when it looks like it's not going anywhere, but they won't give up, they refuse to give up. So that's a different ball game altogether. But in general, most people give up when it's too soon. So, for example, Stephen King, who we all know is a huge author, got loads of books out. He's done TV and film. A lot of his stories have been turned into movies, and yeah, he's a household name. Writes big stories. We all know many of his stories. But Stephen King used to work as a teacher. Excuse me. He used to work as a teacher, and he would work long days to fund his lifestyle, basically to pay the bills. And then he would work in the evenings, working hard, writing his stories. He would send his stories out to places. They would often get rejected. It is said that Stephen King had so many rejections that he had to swap a thumbtack for a nail to hold them all up. And he would have them on show so he could see them. He didn't bin them, he had them on show, he'd keep them. And it was, I suppose, it was a form of motivation for him to carry on writing and working. And then I think Carrie was his turning point when someone contacted him and said they would like to publish it as a soft back print. I think he published it as a short story in a magazine or in a paper. But then when Carrie was published, it then turned his life around and changed him around. But he carried on no matter how many rejection slips that he received from publishing houses. He carried on. Most people would give up at that point. And two other authors that spring to mind, James Patterson, for example. Now, he received 30 odd rejection slips, possibly, I think it's about 32, but he was rejected at least 30 times before he had one of his short stories published. The guy was a creative person. He used to work for an advertising company, but it took 30 rejections before one of his stories was actually published by a publishing house. Now, a lot of people would have given up way before then. Some people would have given up after 5 attempts, maybe even just a couple of attempts. Some people will think, obviously, if this publishing house thinks I'm rubbish and that publishing house thinks I'm rubbish, I've got no talent. James Patterson, he carried on for another 28 odd times before he managed to get, I won't say success, because that was actually the start of his successful journey. At one point, he had a book published and then realised that the publishing company was not going to do the advertising or promote the book, which he knew because he used to work for an advertising agency that did TV adverts, that for the book to go sort of to hit a bestseller, for it to really grow, people needed to see the book. Having a book published by a publishing company is one thing, but they generally expect you to do a lot of the work yourself. They will pay for the distribution and the printing of the book, but the advertising was down to, a lot of the time, was down to the actual author. And so James Patterson was pushing to have this advert done, and they wouldn't. So he took his own money and took several thousand of his own dollars and got the book advertised on TV, which then sent the sales skyrocketing. So he wouldn't give up. He didn't give up. And another author who springs to mind is J.K. Rowling. Now, I'm sure that everybody has heard of Harry Potter. Harry Potter has grown into a billion-dollar franchise. J.K. Rowling herself was a billionaire until she donated a lot of her income from her Harry Potter world and other stories. She donated them to good charities. One of them, I think, was to do with dementia, because I think her mother suffered with dementia, so she helped out. She's done a lot for society, but her Harry Potter books helped grow this billion-dollar franchise. We have Harry Potter World, which is like a theme park. There are the films. There's the Harry Potter Lego, I believe, and then there's all these other merchandise that's come around from this book. Now, this book, Harry Potter, the first one was written while she was a single mother on benefits. She came up with the idea on a train. She spent a fair bit of time in coffee shops in Edinburgh, where she was living at the time, writing while her young child was asleep in the pram. And she sent off the first manuscript. It was rejected, I believe, around 9 times from 9 different publishing houses. Now, a lot of people, again, would have thought, it's been rejected 9 times. Obviously, the book is rubbish. I'll not carry on. She didn't. She carried on. And eventually the book was published and it became the phenomena that we know today. And if I'm not mistaken, there was actually a book already published about a young boy who went to a wizard school. So if you're thinking, story's already written, you can't do it, I know this is another story for another day, but the fact is there was a similar story out, but Harry Potter obviously was written to a point that it tapped into a specific mindset of children, and it grew into this billion-dollar empire that it is now. But the experts, or the people who sell books, the publishers, the editors, who are always looking for new talent, because a publishing house is a business, they believe that they're looking for books that they believe will sell well, because obviously they don't want to publish anything which they think isn't going to sell well. So they overlooked Harry Potter. And as I say, this has grown into a billion-dollar industry, to a franchise. So it makes you often wonder that not every expert, not every person who is supposed to know their industry is always right. And this brings me back round to another famous failing, if I can use the word failing, and that is the Beatles. Who hasn't heard of the Beatles? The Beatles have produced some of the greatest music ever. Not particularly my kind of music. I like some of the Beatles stuff, but the Beatles, Paul McCartney is worth an absolute fortune off the back of the music that he created. The Beatles are, everybody knows of the Beatles. It's just one of the biggest bands in the history of modern music. But the Beatles probably would not have been around if it had not been for the tenacity, the determination, and the passion of the 4 musicians, because they were rejected by Decca Records, and the A&R man for Decca Records basically said, and this is from the late 50s, early 60s, that their music was old and outdated. Now, we live in a world where there is so many different styles, from electronic music, computer music, the different genres. In the 50s, there was basically, it was guitar and drum and bass, guitars, drums, bass, and whatever instruments they had around. The technology and the electronic music was really in its infancy that day. So really, apart from a variation of the same, the music, there wasn't that many genres around. And so here was the A&R man from Decca Records basically saying that the Beatles were old style, and that the youth of the early 1960s wouldn't take to it. Now, if the Beatles had been like a lot of other bands around, probably again would have thought, okay, that's A&R. Decca Records was a big player in them days, and we've just been rejected by, they're saying that we're no good. They're the guys behind a lot of the successful records, and they're saying we're old and outdated. Should we give up? Now, I don't know if they changed their style or if they just carried on believing in themselves, or what really, how things unfolded. But the Beatles didn't give up, and as we know, they became one of the biggest bands in modern history. So again, that is another story of where people didn't give up. And the Beatles were touring around Germany before they became successful. In the internet world, you can liken the Beatles to growing an email list before they really created their main winning product. Because they were touring the clubs of Germany and they were playing in the Cavern in Liverpool. So they were actually creating their fan base. And to have a record label saying that, no, they're not good, when they were sort of up there already. They had their fan base, they had their following. And I think somebody must have realised it's the Arctic Monkeys. Again, this is a modern from the Arctic Monkeys, actually probably about 2002, 2003. So they're nearly getting on to 20 years old. But they built up their fan base by playing around in Sheffield and other gigs and other clubs and towns and cities, that it was the youth who helped them propel to where they were. They were on a roller coaster ride, but they were building a fan base similar to how the Beatles were. They were creating their following at the beginning. So if the Beatles had basically been told by Decca Records that they were no good, if they quit, they would have missed out big time, but they didn't. And so this is one of the things that I think we need to address. People have these ideas, they have these business ideas, they want to become a writer, they want to be a musician, and they start and they learn and they get several knockbacks, and then the uncomfort feelings, the uncomfortable feelings of rejection take over. The ego begins to feel bruised and wounded, because nobody likes to think that their products or their work is rubbish. Then when somebody else says it is, it kind of, in their mind, validates that their work and their opinions, their music, whatever it is that they have, whatever they've created, is not of any good. And so they kind of put their worth into other people's opinions, and allow them to dictate what they believe their product is really like, which is in many ways foolish. I mean, when you start off doing things at the beginning, it will always be poor compared to the later productions, because you're always going to start somewhere, and you develop systems and perfection as you go along. So, for example, these podcasts may look a hell of a lot different to number 30, number 50, because as I go along, things will get better, they will improve. But at the beginning, things will look a little bit shoddy, but successful people do not allow that to stop them. They realize things are going to look rough at the beginning, and they have an idea that they want to do something. It's the belief and the understanding that it's something that they want to do, whatever other people think, and that's what they aim for. Their products, even if somebody comes along and says, "I don't like that," they may think that it's good. They may think, "I don't understand where they're coming from." They may think, okay, fair point, it is rubbish, but I'm not going to stop. So a successful person is just not going to allow the words or the opinions of somebody else to stop them following their dream, whatever their dream is. So with J.K. Rowling, with Stephen King, with James Patterson, with the Beatles, with whatever. I mean, there's music, there's people, there's numerous stories where people have been told that they will never amount to anything, and yet they have. I think Testament is, I can't think of his name now, but there was another story where a guy was told at school that he would never amount to what he wanted to, and yet he still went out there and became one of the biggest players in that industry, in that niche. So really, success is about not giving up, as well as other things. There's systems. You've got to understand which makes something more successful than others. So, for example, going back to the book writing, you want to be a writer, you write one book, you publish it, and then just leave it there and hope that it will become successful. That's not necessarily going to help you. Yes, there are some people who wrote one book, and then that one book sells well, they become successful off that one book. Lots of writers will write one book, get it published, they'll start the next one. Yes, they'll try and do an advertising around that book. Same with musicians, with music, they'll try and advertise and push that one, but they will keep on working and creating more. Now, there's a reason for that, and that's because if you've ever been into a shop with the empty shelves, or if you walk past the shop and you walk past and you see the shelves, the shop window is basically empty, you don't really want to go in there, because you're going to suddenly think, there's nothing in that shop for me. It's not going to give me anything. It's empty. It must be a rubbish shop. An author, if you're a self-published author and you go to Amazon and you find the person has one book, then you're automatically going to think, there's not much there for me. If he's only got the one book, that means that one's not selling, no one's interested in it, he's not bothered writing any more follow-ups. People get attached to musicians, they get attached to authors, they get attached to writers. Publishing houses, and record labels, when they publish an album or a book, and they take somebody on, they generally often have a contract for 3 or 4, follow-ups. They don't just necessarily do the one. They may do it with music now, but they used to sort of have like a 3-album deal or a 3-book deal, because they believe that one book is going to be a good seller, and they want more to back up. It's like their follow-up product. And so in the back of our minds, we still think that even if you're self-published, that if you've only got the one book published out there on Amazon, then if you haven't got more than one, then obviously no one's putting the time into reading your book, no one's putting the time into publishing your book. So automatically you just think you've got the one product, not very good. So successful people who will get a product out there will then start on the next and start on the next, start on the next. And it's kind of like a bit of brand advertising. Like when you go around a city, you see lots of Costa coffee shops and lots of McDonald's. You become familiar with that person. And then if 5 or 10 streets in a city centre has a Costa coffee shop on the corner, then you think they're obviously doing something right. People are going there, the places are busy, they've opened up more than one shop, so they know what they're doing, it must be good. So people perceive large amounts of a product or similar products to one brand name as being good. And so if you are a musician and if you are a author or whatever it is, if you create the one product and nothing else, then you're not going to be perceived as being very productive and being very, very good. If you do, then people may stop and look and think you've got 5 books written. I might actually have a look at that. There's obviously he believes in himself, he's put in the time, he's created the books, there's multiple products, then it'd be worth actually having a look to see if they're any good. So if you want to be successful, you need to not quit too early, ignore necessarily what other people are saying. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take criticism and learn from it. Obviously you don't want to go, actually, no, you're wrong, my book's brilliant. Take on criticism, have a look, see if you can change it, if you can improve it. If you can't, that's fair enough. And then also become more prolific. Don't just stop with the one product. You create one product, get it out there, and then you start on the next. Again, ignoring what other people have said. If this is something that you want to do, if it's your dream, if you want to change your life, if you want to follow a dream, then don't let anybody else stop you. And that is the thing that successful people do. Again, we live in a world today where we have access to social media, we have Instagram, we have TikTok. There's so much quick gratification, so much enjoyment out there. You can, if you're feeling down, you're feeling miserable, pick up your mobile phone, you can find something to be laughing at within seconds. Times have changed, so we expect things to happen quickly. We expect our moods to be changed quickly. We expect people to entertain us quickly. And with that in mind, people are expecting results quickly and they're expecting success quickly. But the truth is, when it comes to absolute success, the only way you're going to get that is really by not quitting soon. You have to keep on, and you have to recognize the fact that you can't give up. Once you get rejected, carry on. Once you get rejected again, you carry on. As I say, James Patterson was rejected 30 odd times before his first short story was ever published, before his first little novel was published. Stephen King was working as a teacher and he was writing at night, and he was constantly sending out short stories. He was sending them to small papers and trying to get things published. He had loads of rejections, but he didn't give in. The Beatles did not stop when they were told that they were old, outdated music. And J.K. Rowling, she was turned down by, I actually think it was 12 now, looking at my notes. I think it was 12 times for the first Harry Potter book. And in fact, another story which I find interesting with J.K. Rowling is that when she was riding the wave of popularity and she was generating a lot of money from a Harry Potter book, she also decided to write some crime thrillers under a pen name and aimed them at an adult market. This was the name Robert Galbraith, I think, something like that, Robert Galbraith. And so she wrote a story which, again, she sent out to publishing houses, which was, again, rejected. So the publishing houses, not knowing who it was, rejected the book on the book itself, believing that it wasn't going to sell, and believing that the author could not write a successful, popular book which would sell, even though she was now making oodles of millions from a Harry Potter series. Now, I don't know if this was a marketing ploy by her, by a friend, or by an agent, or if it just accidentally slipped out. But then rumour was slipped that the author, Robert Galbraith, was actually J.K. Rowling, and she'd gone into this more adult crime thriller audience. And then as soon as that was released, everybody was interested. Suddenly the books was offered publishing deals, and they were shooting off the shelves. So as we know now, J.K. Rowling has actually got Harry Potter books. She's got there's a series of books to do with Amazing Incredible Beasts. I can't remember the title of that. And then there are those crime books that she's writing under the moniker of Robert Galbraith. So the woman's quite busy. She's quite prolific. She hasn't given up. And testament to her not giving up, testament to her passion, her desire, her drive, and her discipline, her tenacity, is that she is now worth, or was worth, £1 billion. She was a billionaire, but she's she doesn't have to have a day job ever again. Her day job basically is writing, and if you were to take a day off work, and if she were to take a day off work, she's going to earn far more than most people do on their days off, and that's because she did not give in. She did not quit too soon. So what I'm trying to say to you, what I'm trying to ask you is that if you're doing something and it's something you want to do, it's a passion and you want to do this, whatever is said, whoever rejects you, how many rejections you get, carry on, because we never know what is behind the scenes. We see the successful people, we see Alan Sugar, we see Richard Branson of Virgin, but you never see all the failings that they have until you pick up an autobiography or you hear them, and then you hear the stories about how they were nearly bankrupt, or how they had 5 failed business beforehand, or how they were about to be sent to prison and fined heavily for tax evasion or tax irregularities because they didn't know what they were doing. And we don't see this when in the here and now. You just see them in the magazines, you see them in the books, you see them on the radio, being who they are. We know they're successful, we know that they're popular and they're celebrities, but we never know what's hidden in the background until you actually look. And most people have been rejected left, right and centre, but they just never allowed that rejection to stop, and they never quit too soon. So going back to what that image I said about seeing on the internet about the guy with the pickaxe chipping away into the ground, into the rock, and he's built this tunnel, and he's just about 6 inches away from finding a large chunk of gold, decides it's not working, and then gives up. I don't want that to happen to you, so I'm now going to bring this edition of the podcast to an end, and just wanted to say that, just to recap, and that is, whatever it is you want to do, don't listen to anybody else, do not quit too soon, and keep working at it, because that is the only way you're going to get success, and that is the only way you're going to change your life and your circumstances. Do not quit too soon. Okay, I'm Andy Lehman. This was the Streetwise Business Podcast. I just want to say thank you very much for listening. I shall be doing another podcast next week. And just to recap, to be money-wise, you need to be streetwise.